So I'm going to speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then we'll do breakout groups, just like we have in the past with the Common Good Cafe. Basically, what I'll talk about tonight is why I got involved with I-103 and how corporations exert power in Seattle. I'll give an overview of Initiative 103. For those of you, some of it may be a little repetitive. For some of you, I'll go a little more in depth for people who've heard about it. I'm also going to talk about how things changed, because one of the most common questions I get is, can we do this? And so I want to say, yes, we can. In fact, we are. And then we'll do our breakout groups, and then we'll come back from the breakout groups and we'll have a group question and answer session. So I'm really glad that you're here, and with that, I'll get started. So why am I here? How did I end up trying to do this? This was a 2004 article. Some of you may have seen it. It's Bill Gates in a gorilla suit on the Seattle Weekly. And this was an article I wrote called Citizen Microsoft, where we were basically asking the question, what kind of citizen is Microsoft? And we determined that at that time, Microsoft was out there saying that us taxpayers needed to step up and spend more money on public education. And I happened to uncover that at the same time they were saying this, they had lobbied to reduce the rate of the royalty tax in Washington, and also started an office in Nevada to start dodging the royalty taxes. And so they were being complete hypocrites. And over the past 14 years, Microsoft has earned $579 billion. So if you include lobbying and tax dodging in Nevada, they've saved $4.37 billion, which coincidentally, the amount of money we've cut from K through 12 and higher education in Washington is about $4 billion under Governor Gregoire. So a couple of years ago, I started blogging about this at MicrosoftTaxDodge.com, and I went to the legislature, and I thought that there was a $2 billion deficit at that time, and Microsoft accounted for over $1 billion and $1.24 billion. And I thought, this is a no-brainer. Microsoft wants to spend more on education, and the legislature is going to be concerned about this tax dodge. So here's what happened. Democratic chair of the Finance Committee, Ross Hunter, he's a 17-year ex-Microsoft veteran. He led the change to the law so that the royalty tax was redefined and shrunk dramatically so that actually the tax didn't exist in its form anymore. And so Microsoft essentially wasn't really dodging the tax. But just to cover his bases, he also added in a clause so that Microsoft would have amnesty from their back taxes. And if that wasn't enough, the governor, shortly after, appointed one of my former coworkers, Susan Del Bene, to run the tax department. And she still worked at Microsoft a few years before, and then she's still married to one of my former bosses, Kurt Del Bene, who's the president of the Microsoft Office division. So you can see it's very close quarters between Microsoft and the Department of Revenue. And then the governor, she went around praising Microsoft and Boeing, especially Microsoft, for giving $5 million a year to scholarships to expand the UW Tech graduate program. And of course, she didn't mention that the company was saving $100 million because of the bill she just signed, $100 million annually. So you may not have heard of this because the Seattle Times has never written about it, but they do let Microsoft's general counsel, Brad Smith, write columns from time to time. In his February column, he talked about, again, taxpayers need to step up, fund education, and he specifically talked about he supports the governor's plan to increase the sales tax. Washington State already has the most regressive tax in the nation, and so to increase the sales tax to pay for education, the $4 billion that we've cut, when Microsoft has saved $4 billion, when it's the most profitable company in the country, is just incredible. I mean, you have to really try hard to be that hypocritical. So what I learned from this experience was that nothing was going to happen going to the state legislature and the governor, and not much was going to happen going to the media. And so I started to look elsewhere for change. So before I go into what kind of change, I want to talk about how corporations influence things in Seattle. About 2 years ago, you may remember, the Seattle City Council passed a plastic bag tax. Everybody remember that? Okay. There's a 20-cent fee, I think, on plastic bags. The American Chemistry Council spent $1.4 million to launch a referendum campaign to essentially undo what the Seattle City Council had done. And they were successful. So that eliminated the plastic bag fee. last year, you may remember that Costco spent $22 million statewide to privatize the liquor industry. So those are two examples of how corporations are influencing power. If they have a law that they don't like, they'll file a referendum and they'll recall the law. If they have a law that they want, that they think will help make them more profitable, they'll fund an initiative. The reason they're able to spend this kind of money is it's very archaic law. It goes back to 1886, Santa Clara versus Southern Pacific Railroad, and it's corporate personhood, which, has everyone here heard of corporate personhood? So in 1886, the court formalized that they believed that corporations should be treated as persons under the law and be granted equal protection rights, just like any of us citizens. And that begat a number of problems that are still making themselves felt in our society. Among them, that corporations have the right to spend unlimited amounts of money because that's free speech to them. So that's how they're able to pay for this referendum campaign and this initiative. The ironic and really it's really tragic too, is the 14th Amendment with the Equal Protection Clause was actually the work of abolitionists who fought for 50 years to basically end discrimination for the slaves and create more social justice in our country. And every legal case where corporations assert personhood today is based on the work of the abolitionists and these laws that were meant to end this horrible history of slavery and discrimination in our country. And so you might be saying, well, they don't really regularly use these laws, right? Well, I'm going to give you another example. This is a present day. How many of you have heard about the City of Seattle's phone book opt-out ordinance? So I've opted out, 1/5 of people and businesses in the city have opted out and said that they don't want phone books. As soon as the city passed this law, the phone book companies sued the city. And the law's been very popular. It's saved 340 tons of waste and stopped 420,000 phone books from being delivered. The phone book companies lost their lawsuit right away, but they've appealed, and the appeal has been going on for about a year. So it's cost the city well over $100,000 already, and it continues to drag on. And if you read the tea leaves, it looks like the city may actually lose the lawsuit, which means that they may have to pay the attorney's fees of these companies and penalties to these companies, and we may soon be faced with the thud, thud, thud of phone books dropping on our porches again. So how is it that these phone book companies can overturn the law? Well, Dex Media, Superpages, and the Yellow Pages claim that they're corporate persons, and that the Yellow Pages are free speech, and that actually the directory listings in the phone books are being transferred across state lines, and that it's not, the city constitutionally can't regulate the transfer of that information across state lines, that only Congress can regulate. And they're claiming that their equal protection rights have been violated. Are you with me? Okay, so you thought that this was just an academic discussion. It's actually going on all around us. So it's costing taxpayers money, and they're trying to overturn popular laws. So again, let's back up. If you don't like a law, you can have it referendum. You can pass a referendum. If you want your own law, you can file for an initiative. And if you don't think that you can get the taxpayers behind recalling a law, then you can actually just file a lawsuit and cost the taxpayers a bunch of money. So another way to influence the government in Seattle is to go behind the scenes and lobby. So how many of you have heard about the $200 million the taxpayers of Seattle have offered up for another NBA arena? Okay. Now, how is it that these plans just sort of arrive at the doorstep and are reported in the Seattle Times as these sort of well-packaged things? Well, the mayor has been talking to Chris Hansen, this hedge fund investor, for months. And they've been working out the details, and then they sort of drop in our lap, hey, eat this cake, it tastes good. So if you thought we already had an NBA arena, like Key Arena, then you probably were wrong. So the mayor seems happy to suggest that us citizens should put $200 million towards paying for another basketball arena. But when it comes to actually training the police to be responsible and to protect us properly, he's afraid of spending $40 million. So it's the fact that these corporations can go behind our back and just lobby in private needs to change. So we've talked about referendums, initiatives, lawsuits, lobbying. There's another way, basically just the status quo, which is that the city is afraid to take on another lawsuit. So let's look at the coal train coming to Ballard and Seattle. How many of you have heard about the coal train? So Peabody Energy wants to ship coal to Asia from Montana for the next 50 years. And to do it, they're going to send 18-mile-and-a-half-long coal trains through Seattle up to Bellingham. Now, this is bad for Seattle in so many ways. We are a city that cares about climate change. The city council has resolved to do something about climate change, and yet we have no power to stop the coal from moving through our city, being shipped to China and burned, and it will increase climate change and fall back to us as acid rain. But basically, just the threat of a lawsuit, if the city were to try to regulate the coal trains, they would be slapped with a lawsuit. Again, the Commerce Clause saying that it regulates interstate commerce. So these are so again, the referendum process, the initiative process, lawsuits, and lobbying. These are ways that corporations are impacting our city today. So if the idea of corporate personhood isn't bad enough, I'm going to take it one step further. Would you be surprised to learn that these companies actually aren't even American? So the American Chemistry Council has members such as Japan's Mitsubishi Chemical Corporation, and Germany's Evonik, and the Netherlands' Akzo Nobel, and India's Dorf Kettle. So these companies were able to be part of a referendum campaign to overturn our city laws. The Yellow Pages Media Association represents one of their members, which is the Yellow Pages Group of Canada, which is a Canadian corporation. Peabody Energy is owned 12% by foreign investors. So when we talk about Microsoft's tax dodging a while ago, they're owned 7% by foreign investors. So when you look at this 1886 law granting corporate personhood and corporate constitutional rights, such as free speech and protections from the Commerce Clause and equal protection, when you grant them to these corporate persons, you're not even giving them to Americans anymore. So there's just no basis in our Constitution or our Declaration of Independence or any of our founding documents for this transfer of constitutional rights from Americans to these non-human beings that are actually not even owned by Americans. So when we say yes to laws that we want, like we want to stop phone book delivery or we want to tax plastic bags because they're harmful to the environment, you can see how our laws are getting overturned. When we can't necessarily say no to things like phone books or the coal train, because then they can sue over the Commerce Clause and say that only Congress can regulate these kinds of industries. So a new approach is definitely needed. Would you all agree? Based on, and so for me, that approach has been the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, which I got involved with actually around the time of that article I showed you. And their approach has been to work with communities and say, we're no longer going to play on this uneven playing field that has been corrupted by corporate money. We're no longer going to limit ourselves to the two bad choices of, do we go with the Republicans or the Democrats? So what they've started doing in communities all around the country is passing laws that basically ban corporate harms and then strip corporations of these personhood rights and these constitutional rights that were really only granted by judges in the 19th century that actually never appear in any of our founding documents. So is everybody with me? Okay. So what does I-103 do? Well, the first piece of it is that it creates sensible limits on corporate power. So what that means is we're eliminating corporate personhood, judge-made corporate constitutional rights. This would stop things like the phone book lawsuit. In court, I listened to the arguments in the district court appeal case, and they're arguing over whether yellow pages and white pages are free speech or commercial speech. But they never asked the question, are these phone book companies persons? Should they be able to file a lawsuit against the city? Should they have equal protection rights? Initiative 103 bans corporate spending on elections. So it reverses Citizens United locally. So how many have you heard of Tim Eyman? I wore a says, imagine Seattle without Tim Eyman this weekend at the Fremont Parade. I had people coming up to me all weekend saying, I want to sign that thing. So Tim Eyman received $200,000 from BP and ConocoPhillips, and he funnels that into signature gathering. with I-103's ban on corporate spending, he wouldn't be able to use that money to pay signature gatherers in Seattle. He might still be able to do it in other cities, but not here in Seattle. And because we're one of the biggest areas of the state, it will be a lot more challenging for him. The American Chemistry Council would never have been able to spend $1.4 million on a referendum campaign. So another thing 103 does is it restricts lobbying by corporations to public forums. So this whole NBA arena deal, it would never have been able to happen except in the broad light of day, so that we would all have been a part of the discussion from the beginning. The other huge piece of Initiative 103 is that it creates a community bill of rights. It provides rights for nature. So when we're talking about, well, nature under our legal system is property. It means that only certain people who have standing that might be affected by the property that they own or nearby the property that they own, only certain people can sue. And there's all sorts of rules about what you can sue for and what kind of damages. But the fact is, Seattle wants to be able to say no to the coal train. The coal train makes no sense. At this day and age, with the climate on the brink, we have to stop the coal train. And just checking the time here. And state and federal regulations do not provide the power for the city to stop the coal train. So Initiatives 103 Rights for Nature basically says the citizens of Seattle give the city council the authority to pass laws that protect our community and protect our environment. And that's how Initiative 103 would be used to just ban the coal train. We also provide citizen oversight of the police department, because a lot of us in this room have been at rallies, peaceful protests, where the police show up in militarized garb and intimidate people. They show up in black vans, lines of gang police. The rally I was at Westlake, there were mounted police, gang police. It's just a huge overreaction. And some of you may have seen this on the news last night. Some friends and colleagues of mine were out marching against student debt, like they had for the 2 weeks previous, peacefully. And last week, the Seattle police escorted them by bike down Broadway and were smiling and joking with them. And last night, the Seattle police showed up in police cars and started driving the cars, pushing them against the sidewalk, and then started grabbing people from the crowd in a way that incited the crowd into more of a violent energy. And there was a fight that broke out between the police and the protesters. And if you watch the video, it's clear that the police were making poor judgments, and probably that the march had been peaceful until the police started to intervene. So there's clearly problems with the police. The entire Department of Justice investigation is a sign of that. And so Initiative 103 is trying to make sure that we have the right to protect our democracy, to go out into the streets, to gather, to rally. It also provides neighborhoods the right to approve major zoning changes. So the mayor has proposed zoning changes to Capitol Hill that would allow first floor retail in areas that today are primarily residential. The Capitol Hill Council has been against these changes. I-103 would require that neighborhoods be able to approve these changes with a 50% majority. And I know that some people are really concerned about this, but if you can't convince 50% of a neighborhood that a change is good, a commercial change to zoning, then you're ramming down the throats these changes. And so also in the SoDo area where the NBA arena would appear, the business leaders there are quite concerned about how the NBA arena will affect freight and traffic. And so they should also have a say in whether these zoning changes take place. And 103 is written smartly in that if this is about transit or public health or safety, 103 doesn't apply. It doesn't affect changes to zoning that would affect things that are related to the public good. Another thing that Initiative 103 does is it provides rights for workers, constitutional rights in the workplace, and collective bargaining rights. Steve Lansing was here last week. How many of you were here? You heard him mention that the biggest challenge to workers in Seattle is not getting enough hours. So grocery stores like QFC, Safeway, pharmacies like Walgreens, what they're doing is they're putting their employees on these part-time schedules that change frequently. So you actually can't make enough money to get by, you can't get benefits, you're dependent on that employer, and your schedule changes so much that you actually can't take a second job because you can't coordinate your schedule. And so it's important that workers be able to organize, that they be able to meet with each other. And so like if you go put up a flyer in the coffee break room, you're going to get punished or fired. And so 103 would provide the kinds of protections that help workers organize safely and to hopefully push back against these powers that are really destroying our middle class in Seattle. I-103 also addresses internet network neutrality. So network neutrality is basically, it's the way the internet mostly operates today, which is that everybody's bits coming from everybody's websites are treated the same. And that's important because things like the I-103 blog, we don't have the money to pay Comcast a premium. We don't have really any money. So we can't pay anyone a premium to deliver our bits at the same speed that Netflix gets their bits delivered or that Microsoft gets their bits delivered. So we rely on network neutrality to make sure that everybody has a fair and equal access to our website. So that's one of the things that I-103 would legislate. It would make law the status quo of the internet today. You may have also heard the city of Seattle had these pilot municipal Wi-Fi projects right here in the U District, right where we're standing, and then also in Columbia City. Those were quietly unplugged a few weeks ago. I don't know if you know that, because of budget cuts. And so the idea that the city of Seattle would be a groundbreaking leader in municipal broadband, that's been just shelved for now. There's just no plans for that. So we are now even more dependent on Comcast and CenturyLink, which have the monopolies to our fiber and our cable. And so I think it's really important that I-103 includes these basic internet protections. So how do things change? The most common question that I get, again, is, can you actually do this? You know, they're like, the Supreme Court passed Citizens United, and that's a federal law. Well, the Constitution as written, if you know your Constitution, it endorsed slavery. It endorsed women couldn't vote. And those things have changed over a long period of time. And the way that they changed, in some cases war, in some cases, but generally legal battles. And the way those legal battles start is somebody passing a law and then someone challenging that law. And that's exactly what we're doing with Initiative 103. And it's happened in Washington State before. So for 40 years, from 1897 to 1937, at the end of the industrial age, the Supreme Court used to outright overturn minimum wage laws all across the country. And then Washington State passed its minimum wage law, and a woman named Elsie Parrish, she was a hotel chambermaid in Wenatchee, she sued, and she actually lost in court. And she took it to the state Supreme Court, and she won, and then the Supreme Court upheld that. And from then on, the Supreme Court honored labor standard laws and minimum wage laws differently. And that was a precedent that had gone on for 40 years. Just like Citizens United seems like it's unsurmountable right now. But so we know that change like this has happened in Washington before, and we can look to that as an example that the way we're doing this is correct. And the Supreme Court's approval rating right now is at a 25-year low. 65% of Democrats and Republicans disapprove of Citizens United, and the next president is going to get to appoint 3 Supreme Court justices. So we believe that we're doing this at the proper time and that popular opinion is on our side. So if I-103 passes and makes it to the Supreme Court one day, that we will be in good shape. So what's important about 103 is that it focuses on structural change. We are actually making law that changes the playing field. A lot of times I think actions focus on things that don't change, like maybe it's online petitions where really the purpose is to collect your email address so they can hit you up for money, or rallies and protests that don't have a clear, focused end game, or ongoing lobbying to the state officials like I was doing to try to get them to fix the tax loophole for Microsoft. I mean, we have to ask ourselves, are these actions that we're taking effective? And what I-103 is doing is, forgetting all that, and it's saying, let's change the law here. We have the right to do that in Seattle. Let's do it. And let's set an example. Let's be inspirational for other communities, and let's be aspirational. I think sometimes that we've created a mental cage around ourselves, that we've convinced ourselves that we have to play by the rules that have been set up, and the rules aren't fair, and that there's no way around those rules. And so what I-103 is doing is it's throwing out the rules, and it's following the law that we have, which is as citizens we can organize and put an initiative on the ballot and pass it and change the law, and that's what we're doing. So what's the status? Well, we haven't spent any money on signature gathering. We were talking earlier, some of you may have heard, there's a charter schools initiative where they're paying signature gatherers $4 to $5 a signature. There's $500,000 being spent over the next month. We haven't spent a cent. We are all volunteer. We're all grassroots, and I have a stack of initiatives signed by Seattle voters. We'll wait till the end. Signed by voters who the idea of corporate power resonates, and they know that it needs to change, and they've signed this, that we can't let those people down. So in order to qualify for the ballot, we need to bring more people into the mix. Everybody who's done a little needs to do a little more. And if you haven't been involved or haven't engaged yet, I need you to do a little. Because this is not gonna, we're not gonna succeed at getting this on the ballot without everybody's help. To try to do this without any money, I don't know if it's ever been done before. In closing, I'd like to say that I-103 is really radical change. We have been immersed in this society that has added these fictional rights to corporations for over 100 years. And we're starting to unwind that with I-103 and challenge what's possible when we live in communities that don't have to subject themselves to corporate personhood and corporate speech and corporate spending in elections and corporate lobbying. And so I think I-103 is quite radical, and I hope that you're excited about it. So with that, that's a very fast intro into what we're doing. We're going to do breakouts, and the question I would like to leave you with as you break into your groups is, what do you think, I'd like your help brainstorming, what do you think we can do in our neighborhoods to raise awareness for some of the issues that I've brought up tonight and for Initiative 103? Because we need 20,000 signatures from Seattle voters. So I would really like your help and ideas about how to make more people aware of this. And keep in mind, we're in an environment where the media doesn't want to cover this. The Seattle Times hasn't mentioned this to anyone. The Seattle Weekly hasn't mentioned this to anyone. I am actually doing an interview tomorrow with The Stranger, so I'm super excited about that. But those are the 3 big papers in Seattle. And so I would really like your help in thinking, how do we do this? The other thing I'd like to do as you're in your breakout is, what are you willing to do personally for 103? Are you willing to make a personal commitment? So there's a couple things on your chairs. There's a list that you can take home. It's a checklist of how you can help, and maybe you can refer to that in your brainstorming. And there's a little card, and if you're willing to make a personal commitment of some kind, of any kind, write down that and your email address so I can get in touch with you, or your phone number, and we would really appreciate that. So you'll have 15 minutes. You can take a short break for cookies and coffee, and we'll break into groups of 5 to 6 people, and then I'll get you back together around 7:50. And we'll close up with questions and more discussion. So thank you very much. Let's split into groups. The question was, do we anticipate a legal challenge based on the fact that I-103 represents a community bill of rights and restrictions on corporate rights? And I expect legal challenges on across the board. Corporations don't want this to go through. So once we make the ballot, that's going to be the start of the battle. And they're going to be spending money to lie to voters about why this is bad for them. And then if it passes, they're going to be going to court to try to tear it apart. So that's just part of the challenge that we have ahead. But honestly, all I'm focused on right now is getting it on the ballot. To respond more specifically to your question about the single subject rule, Washington State's Constitution has a rule that initiatives must be a single subject. The ballot title, as the city attorney has written it, is that we are creating a community bill of rights and restrictions on corporations to secure those rights. So that's sort of the single subject. And 90% of cases that have gone to court around the single subject issue have been ruled in favor of the initiative. So there's a little bit more detail I could go into, but the basic idea is that we feel like we're in good standing, and that our initiative is also written very much like the Spokane initiative was the last 2 years. So, Cecile. So the question was, if you're signature gathering or talking to people about Initiative 103, is the information that we presented and these answers all in one place? So we have a website, i103.org, and there's a FAQ, a frequently asked questions page, and that has that question that you just asked. It has many of the common questions. There's also an overview page. There are several other pages where we've written, there's a sharing page, which is on this handout that you have. It's envisionseattle.org/share.html, again, /share.html, and it has links to many of the blog posts about some of these deeper subjects so that you can read more as well. And then I'm also glad to make myself available, or Rich's, to answer questions. Ed. So the question was, is there a time limit or a deadline for gathering signatures? And there is. The end deadline is actually August 31st. And then when we turn them in, we have an extra 20 days that we can use either right away, or we can wait until the clerk tells us if we need more signatures. And so September 20th is probably the most likely end date. Now, if we want to qualify for the ballot this November, we actually have to finish in early to mid-July. So that's one of the reasons why we're working so hard right now, is to make sure that we can qualify for November. But all the work we do now for that will pay off if we qualify in the September timeframe. So if you go to our website, there is a download petitions button, and it is a PDF file. Does anyone not know what a PDF file is? It's a printable document format. And you can print out the petition on your own. You can also, I have a ton of them over here on the table, and I would encourage you to take some. And the only rule is that the city requires that they either be stapled or two-sided. So I prefer that you take some with you, because these are all printed exactly properly. And there's always some at the church if you need refills. So what I typically focus on when I'm educating and talking to people is the corporate pieces, the removal of corporate personhood, the end of judge-made corporate constitutional rights. A woman reminded me that you might call these judges who made these laws activist judges, because they're inventing new rules for society to live by for 100 years that aren't actually written in any founding documents. I think these pieces of corporate power, when we talk about the examples and tie them to what's happening in Seattle, like the phone book lawsuit, where it's costing the city a lot of money and trying to overturn a program that's very popular, or the Costco liquor privatization, where now that people know more about the liquor privatization program, they're upset about it. So I think what I've really tried to do is the American Chemistry Council not actually being all that American. I think tying these examples to what's happening in Seattle, like the coal train, if you connect what's really going on the ground, and it's amazing to me how many things that are happening in Seattle that correspond to this initiative, then I think it helps educate people and get them to care about the initiative. Does that help? Is that one way to help answer your question? Or yeah, we've talked about this a lot, and I don't know the exact right way to configure an initiative in terms of like what was the right package of things to include or exclude. And your opinion on that may be just as valid as mine. And if we fail, we might have to do something simpler. But I will tell you, there are people in this room who would not be here if we were narrowly focusing on corporate personhood, because it's a sterile issue that people don't understand. It's hard to explain sometimes. I know for a fact there are people here who care more about the environment, and they're concerned about rights for nature. So what I've seen is that as we've gone on these last 2.5 months, the events happening in Seattle, like the police arresting these marchers last night and starting a riot, I'm seeing that events seem to indicate that the breadth of 103 is appropriate. And I'm also seeing people come into the fold to participate with us because they've been turned on and engaged by different pieces of the initiative. So I don't think we would have had as broad participation if we'd been narrower, but I don't know the right answer. I can't pretend to know. Neil? Oh, okay. So yeah, that's a better response than my response to your question. So Nikki was saying that if we talk about this more as a community bill of rights for Seattle, that's really what it is, and that is what it is. I personally talk about it more in terms of corporate power, but other volunteers really do talk about it as reestablishing rights in the community that have been sort of taken away. And so that's a great comment. Thank you. So I have a little more show and tell before I let you all go. So I brought some things that are here for you to take home. I highly encourage you to go home and visit ballardlovescoal.com for a laugh. And these were bumper stickers we put up around Ballard to raise awareness for the coal train, because a lot of people in Ballard don't know about it. And there is a Monday event that KUOW is putting on at the public library in Ballard that if you live down there, you should come. I'll be there. So there's some of these, and I encourage you to take them and put them up in your neighborhood. It doesn't have to be in Ballard to raise awareness for the coal train. We have lots of these flyers, and there's a bunch over there. Take a handful and give them out as fast as you can. We have addressed envelopes. You can take several petition forms if you're feeling optimistic. Don't take more than you think you can fill in, but send them back to us here. And also, if you want to send a contribution by check, which we very much appreciate and would use to like printing materials or flyers or something, we don't pay signature gatherers in this campaign like the other guys, but you can send them in the check. And then we do have the most exciting prize you get to take home is these window signs, which I'd love if you put up in your houses. We have 50 of them, so take one home. Sensible limits on corporate power help place Initiative 103 on the ballot. Print it, sign it, send it. Seattle's Community Bill of Rights. And lastly, if you volunteer with us at one of our events like Pride, we have these t-shirts. So on our current order, I think I have about 10 or 11 of these left, mostly large and extra large. So if you sign up for Pride on Sunday, I can put you in one of these beauties and people will come right up to you. And on the back, so it's people, rights are for people on the front and corporations aren't people on the back. So I just want to thank you again for coming out tonight. Rich, see if he was here, he would do this better than me. There are more events in the next, Cindy Sheehan is coming. So she'll be here. And we want to signature gather that crowd. So if anyone wants to volunteer, it's the 27th here, I believe. Yeah, June 27th. And then the Get Money Out of Politics groups has 2 events, July 11th and 18th. And then there's nothing going on here until September. And so there are schedules. I think I saw them on that table with these upcoming events. Molly has them in the back. Neil?
We're just looking for people to help paint.
Oh, right. He wants to paint the room to make it more beautiful. So if you want to volunteer to help him get the Common Good Cafe up to speed for next season, he would love that. Thank you so much for your interest in this and your passion. And I would love to have you volunteer with us. So thank you very much.